Hello Matrix. Today we're going to have a look at the poem Prayer to the Masks by Léopold Sédar Senghor. A little bit of context. So our poet was born in 1906 and he actually became the president of Senegal in 1916. He established a multi-party state and a very strong educational system. Senghor wrote this poem at a time when Senegal was still shaking colonial ties, and this process was very lengthy and very difficult, and in lots of instances there were protests and lots of fights and upheaval that was happening in the country. And in the poem Prayer to Masks, he reflects on the history of his people and its troubled state, but he actually ends the poem on a rather positive note. He looks at how, despite the hardship and prejudices that his people have faced, they are resilient and can create beauty and prosperity. In terms of our poem's intention, Senghor wanted to create awareness of the effects of colonialism on Africa, but also to build a sense of pride in one's African heritage. And he actually appeals to ancestral spirits in the poem to help the oppressed overcome their present state of subjugation and create some kind of hope for a country that is free from colonial ties. Our poem doesn't adhere to any strict structure or rhyme scheme. It has a lot of enjambment in it and some very effective use of punctuation, which we will analyze a little bit further. But otherwise, it's not like a sonnet or anything like that. It's very straightforward. I'm once again going to be using my usual color key, highlighting all our diction in pink, our imagery in green, our tone in orange, our structure in red, and anything to do with mood will be in purple.
Before we get started, I would just like to show you the version of this poem that appeared in a past matric exam, only because the poem that I am annotating in this video starts with a different line. However, I think it's still lovely to annotate both versions, and as I said, it's not a train smash as to which one you were given. You can just ignore the first part of the recording. We will start by looking closely at the opening lines of Senghor's poem. The speaker pays homage to his ancestors and the spirits they represent. Masks here are not simply decorative objects, they are symbols of spiritual presence. Notice that this version of the poem begins with an apostrophe. And no, I'm not talking about the punctuation mark. In literature, an apostrophe is when the speaker addresses an object, person, or spirit that cannot respond in real time. So here Senghor addresses the masks directly as if they were living beings. This creates a deep sense of respect and reverence from the very first line. And the repetition of masks followed by "O masks" gives the impression of awe, almost like an invocation or a prayer. It's quite ceremonial, almost as if he's calling upon them to be present. Looking at the second line, black mask, red mask, you black and white masks, the poet lists colours here, but there's more to it than just description. The combination of black and white carries a racial connotation, connecting Senegal's history of slavery and racial oppression. Senghor is situating his respect for the masks within a wider history of racial struggle. In the third line, we get the phrase, "through whom the spirit breathes." This suggests that the masks are more than just objects, they're vessels for the spirits. The masks are what give the ancestors life in the spiritual world. Notice the I in "I greet you in silence." In line 3, the speaker's use of first-person pronouns makes the moment feel more intimate and sincere, and it shows that the speaker is not just describing the masks, he is personally engaging with them. And the speaker greets the masks in silence, but why silence? Well, silence here is not emptiness, it's an indication of respect, and the exclamation point actually emphasizes that this is a very powerful silence. It's a way of saying, "You are so great, I cannot speak in your presence." If we sum up the tone here, it's one of awe and respect. The mood it creates for us as readers is reverential, maybe even spiritual, and Senghor is showing honour to the masks and the ancestors they represent, acknowledging their guidance and authority. And this opening sets the stage for the whole poem. Senghor is not just celebrating African heritage, but also recognising the deep spiritual connection between the living and the ancestors, as well as the historical burdens carried by that heritage. In the opening of the poem, we saw Senghor greet the masks with deep reverence. Now he moves on to address a particular ancestor, the lion-headed ancestor. This section deepens the poem's respect for heritage and explores the boundaries between the living and the spiritual world. The phrase lion-headed ancestor draws on traditional African masks shaped like lions, and lions are also symbols of strength, courage, and leadership. But this is also not just a random image that just so happens to symbolize strength and courage. In Senegalese culture, the lion is a national symbol. In fact, their national anthem is called the Red Lion. So Senghor uses this imagery to celebrate qualities he believes are necessary to liberate Africa from colonial rule. In line 5, he mentions this place closed to any feminine laughter. This tells us that women are not allowed in the sacred space. This reflects on traditional cultural rules. The world of the ancestors has boundaries, and those boundaries are steeped in custom. But then Senghor says the space is also closed to any mortal smile. This extends the idea. It's not just women, but all living people who are excluded from the spiritual realm. The ancestors' world is set apart from the living. The image of you purify the air of eternity connects directly to the afterlife. The ancestors are portrayed as guardians who keep the spiritual world pure and peaceful. And the lion-headed ancestor's role is to protect this peace. Ending this section with fathers makes the connection personal and respectful. Senghor acknowledges the impact of the ancestors, not only their wisdom, but also the hardships they endured, which have shaped present-day Senegalese life and culture. So far, our poet has greeted the masks, honoured the lion-headed ancestor, and described the sacred realm of the ancestors. Now he shifts to talking about the nature of the masks themselves and directly appeals to them to listen. The phrase masks of maskless faces is an interesting paradox. It means that the masks represent faces that no longer exist in the physical world, ancestors who have passed on. When Senghor says they are free from dimples and wrinkles, he's saying the masks are free from human flaws, aging, and the troubles that mark our faces. These are pure, timeless images. I'd also like you to notice the word altar in line 8. That's diction linked to worship, suggesting that writing this poem is a sacred act. The white paper can be understood quite literally as a page the speaker is writing on, but figuratively it may also suggest the official documents such as laws or political agreements, hinting at the colonial and governmental context of Senghor's world. In line 9, the speaker says, "In the name of your image, listen to me." Senghor's tone becomes quite pleading. There's a sense of urgency here. He's appealing for the ancestors' attention, reminding them that he is the living image of those masks and thus has the right to be heard. The tone here blends reverence with desperation. Up to now, he's been quite formal and respectful, but now there's a note of insistence. The mood shifts. We feel the weight of his request as though something important hangs on whether the ancestors will listen or not. In lines 10 and 11, the speaker moves into a moment of deep reflection on the political changes happening in Africa at the time. When he writes, "The African despotism is dying," he's referring to the decline of oppressive colonial rule, a system that has controlled and exploited the continent for decades. And this death isn't peaceful. He describes it as the agony of a pitiable princess. Now, this image of a princess works on two levels. On the one hand, it symbolizes the nobility of traditional Africa, a land that is rich in culture and dignity. And on the other, pitiable suggests someone who has been spoilt or harmed, reminding us that Africa has been damaged by the exploitation of colonizers. The princess here is not losing her life naturally. She's being forced into this change, just as European colonial powers were forced to give independence to their colonies even when they didn't want to. Senghor then says Africa is like that of Europe, to whom she is connected through the navel. This is quite a striking metaphor, matrix, almost like an umbilical cord, showing how tightly Africa and Europe were linked during colonialism. But unlike a true mother-child bond, this was not a nurturing relationship between Senegal and their colonizers. Europe's connection to Africa was based on mass exploitation of land, labor, and resources. So severing this connection is very much necessary for Africa's freedom, but it is also painful, and the colonizers resist because they stand to lose their wealth and power. In lines 12 to 13, Senghor calls on the masks, the ancestral spirits, to witness the reality of modern Africa. He tells them to fix your immobile eyes, a phrase that captures their godlike, unchanging faces. These masks, remember, are eternal, looking on without any emotion, as if they have seen centuries of history unfold before them. He then speaks of their children, meaning the next generation of Africans who are now called upon to fight for their freedom. And the final image here is a powerful simile. Africans are compared to a poor man giving away his last garment. This is a man who owns almost nothing, yet he's willing to sacrifice the very last thing he has. In the same way, Africans are prepared to give up everything, even their lives, in the pursuit of freedom. Senghor is acknowledging the ultimate price that people are willing to pay for liberation. In line 14, Senghor shifts the focus towards hope and renewal. He speaks of the rebirth of the world, a phrase that captures the idea of a fresh start, not just for Senegal, but for the whole human community after colonial oppression. This is an example of personification. The country is imagined as if it can be reborn, starting anew after the departure of the colonizers. And now free, it can create its own government, laws, and direction for the future. Senghor also uses the word leaven, which means yeast, which is essential for making bread rise. This is not just a practical image, it's a symbolic one. Just as yeast causes dough to grow strong and full, so too can Senegal's independence allow the nation to rise in strength and dignity. The act of rising here becomes a metaphor for empowerment, self-determination, and resilience. The underlying message is that this rebirth requires both spiritual and cultural nourishment. By calling on the masks, Senghor suggests that tradition and heritage are the yeast that will help this new nation flourish. And I would say that the tone in this line is one of optimism and anticipation. There is a belief that with the right foundation, Senegal can grow into its full potential. Line 15 poses a powerful rhetorical question. The phrase, "the world that has died of machines and cannons," is a striking metaphor. Machines and cannons symbolizes industry and warfare, representing a world consumed by conflict. Senghor suggests that this over-reliance on the material and the destructive nature of war has led to a spiritual death of the world. It has lost its ability to feel deeply, to express joy, and perhaps even its connection to its traditions and humanity. And this death also signifies the end of colonialism. In lines 16 and 17, our poet's vision of a renewed Africa gains a sense of urgency and energy. He asks for who else should ejaculate the cry of joy. And here ejaculate means to cry out or shout. This is not a quiet celebration, but a loud, passionate call that can awaken both the dead and the wise. It's as if Africa's rebirth will shake the sleeping and inspire the thoughtful, stirring them into action. And the poet places his hope in the youth. They are the ones who will carry out this cry, and their energy and vision can lead the way into a new dawn, an image that symbolizes a fresh phase of life full of possibility. Senghor contrasts this new vitality with what has come before, a time marked by destruction, despair, and torn hope. Yet even amid that damage, the possibility of renewal remains very strong. The use of rhetorical questions here is very powerful as well. They not only express a little bit of doubt, as if asking, well, who else can do this if not for us? But they also challenge the reader directly. Senghor is calling on his people to step forward to participate actively in shaping this new era. In the final lines of the poem, Senghor refers to the colonizers directly. And he's not just telling us what happened, he's showing us by using the actual stereotypical terms that French colonizers used to label the Senegalese. And these labels dehumanize the African people, reducing them to their physical appearance or the work that they were forced to do. And he's making it clear that this was a period of great pain and disrespect for his people. But if you pay close attention to line 20, you see a shift. The word but indicates a turning point. It's a powerful conjunction that signals a change from the oppressor's words to the African people's own voice. And this is a complete rejection of those labels. Instead of being men of death, they identify themselves as men of the dance. Now, this dance that he refers to isn't just a fun activity, it's a traditional ceremony. It's a spiritual and cultural act. Their feet beating the hard soil symbolizes a deep connection to their land, their ancestors, and their heritage. And this dance symbolizes their newfound freedom and resilience post-colonization. And Senghor focuses on the regaining of identity and taking pride in one's culture. The Senegalese no longer need to be defined by the colonizer's gaze, but by their own rich traditions and spirituality. And it's this dance that is a way of reclaiming their spiritual connection to the world and a connection to the spiritual world as well, which the colonizers tried to destroy. Ultimately, this section of the poem is all about hope. It's a hope for a brighter future where the Senegalese people can recognize their true beauty and their value as human beings, not for the prejudiced stereotypes that they were branded with. And this is the core message of resistance that we see throughout the poem. I hope that you found that video informative and helpful for your studying. Maybe you're studying for your June exams, your prelims, or your final exams. And I would just like to take a moment to take you through some past paper questions on the poem we just analysed. First of all, I always say to my students that it is very good practice to go through all of the papers, or as many of them as possible, as it gets you accustomed to the style of question answering. And you should always have a highlighter at hand so that you can highlight all the specific lines and words that the poem questions are focusing on. So for instance, for question 3.1, it says, explain why the speaker refers to his ancestors as lion-headed. So what you should do is immediately take a highlighter and highlight the word lion-headed so that you can maintain your focus on the correct part of the poem. As I've marked many matric papers before where students don't do this and they end up answering questions but focusing on a completely different line. This might sound a bit ridiculous and like something you wouldn't do in an exam, but you've got to remember that, especially in finals, there is a lot of pressure and you'll experience quite a bit of stress and anxiety, so it's easy to make silly mistakes like this. So going back to question 3.1, it says, explain why the speaker refers to his ancestors as lion-headed. This is just a 2-mark question. It's very straightforward. What you would need to do is apply your knowledge of the poem and apply your knowledge of why the speaker decided to mention the lion-headed ancestor. So you should know, especially after listening to this video, that lions are associated with courage and strength, and these are some of the qualities that the speaker believes will be needed to liberate Africa from colonialism. So all you're focusing on in this question is the connotation of the word lion, and you could also have linked it to the cultural aspect or the fact that the lion is an important symbol in Senegalese culture. For question 3.2, the question states, what does the word silence in line 3 reveal about the speaker's attitude towards the ancestors? And you need to motivate your response. So we've got some key words over here, one of them being attitude, linking attitude to the word silence, and a motivation for your response. So why silence? Why would the speaker want to greet the masks, his ancestors, in silence? So you need to think about, again, the connotations of that particular word and what it is implying about the moment. So again, you should take your highlighter and highlight the line that you are focusing on. And your answer could look something like this. The speaker greets his ancestors in silence, which shows that he is in awe of them and respect for them. And you could just reiterate that the speaker's attitude is respectful, even though you've already mentioned it in the first sentence of your answer. In 3.3, you are being asked to refer to line 13. So again, you take out your highlighter and you highlight that line so that you know you're focusing on it. And line 13 says, and who sacrificed their lives like the poor man his last garment. And the follow-on question, 3.3.1, is just to identify the figure of speech in this line. So again, you need to apply your knowledge, and all you need to say is that it is in simile. Because in 3.3.2, it asks you to comment on the effectiveness of the image. Again, I have marked past papers before where students will immediately answer the second part of the question in the first part and then not do it in the part of the question where they're supposed to. So just make sure that you read your questions carefully and you focus on what exactly you are being asked. When you're asked about effectiveness, you're essentially being asked why. Why use that image? And you're, of course, connecting it to the context of the poem as well. So your answer would look something like this. You would unpack it. Africans are compared to a poor man who has very little but is willing to sacrifice all he owns. That is the unpacking of the simile. Then you will shift to the effectiveness. So this effectively demonstrates how Africans are prepared to give up everything, even their lives, to gain freedom. So we know that Prayer to the Masks is a focus on Senegal in post-colonialism and their striving towards freedom and gaining a new independence. And then for our last question, 3.4, it asks you to refer to line 20. So again, you get out your highlighter and you highlight the whole line, which says, but we are the men of the dance whose feet only gain power when they beat the hard soil. And the question states, critically discuss how this line conveys the central message of the poem. So not only do we need to unpack what is being said in these lines, we need to discuss the central message of the poem. It is always important, matrix, to know what the central message is of all the poems that you need to study, as this question will always come up. There will always be a question on the central message and connecting it to a particular part or segment of the poem. And when we ask you to critically discuss, we almost want you to state your own opinion and state whether or not it is a good connection and state what your understanding is of that line and the message. So your answer could look something like this. The final line highlights how Africans will unite to gain power and freedom. The reference to dance and beat the hard soil emphasizes a sense of rhythm, harmony, and connection with the land and their ancestors. So there you are unpacking what that line means. Then you can shift to the central message and link it. So this line conveys the optimistic central message that Africans will be liberated and will regain their culture and traditions. We know that the poem ends on an optimistic message, on the idea that they will find that freedom, find that independence through a connection to their culture, the spiritual world, etc. So you apply that knowledge to your understanding of the line and your unpacking of that line. Let me know if you're interested in me doing a couple more run-throughs of past papers. I think I could probably do a little bit of a better job in unpacking this particular one, but hopefully it just gives you a bit more guidance into how you should approach your exam questions. And I've also inserted a link to the WCED past paper section of their website. It is a wonderful tool, Matrix. Use those past papers. It is the best way for you to study for these exams. I hope that you enjoyed this video and good luck with your studying.